Welcome to the debate, and welcome to Cognitive Dose. We are here, as always, curing blind spots and shattering cognitive bias.
That we are.
So when we look at the ruins of a collapsed empire, or, the bankruptcy filings of a once untouchable corporation, we instinctively look for external causes.
Right, like a shift in the macroeconomic winds or a sudden technological disruption.
Exactly. Or maybe an aggressive new competitor. But what if the actual cancer was internal? Today, we are establishing the topic of debate around a massive cultural phenomenon. We are examining Ryan Holiday's bestseller, Ego is the Enemy.
Which is, frankly, a book that has been adopted as this modern manual for personal and professional flourishing by Fortune 500 CEOs, Super Bowl winning coaches, and political leaders alike.
It really has. And it draws heavily on classical Stoicism philosophy to make one very compelling claim, namely that the greatest adversary you will ever face is not the market and it's not your competitors, it is your own ego.
But our central debate question today is whether this is actually a timeless, practical guide to achieving greatness through humility.
Right, or if it is, as you might argue, intellectual snake oil, a philosophy that might actually rely on debunked science, fabricated history, and a cynical preservation of the status quo.
Exactly. Because when you strip away the elegant packaging and the inspirational quotes, you really have to ask if this framework holds up to rigorous academic scrutiny. Is it a real philosophical tool, or is it just corporate pacification masquerading as ancient wisdom? I'll be taking that highly critical, data-driven perspective today.
And I am approaching this from the perspective that the book actually offers a profoundly robust, practical framework for mastering our darkest internal impulses. But let's lay out the core concepts first. To be clear from the start, when the book talks about ego, we are not talking about the Freudian psychoanalytic definition.
Okay, so we're discarding the id, ego, and superego model.
Right, exactly. The book defines ego much more practically. It defines it as an unhealthy belief in our own importance. So it's arrogance, it is self-centered ambition, it's that petulant child inside each of us that demands recognition long past any reasonable utility.
I see.
I like to think of it like an autoimmune disease of the mind. Your immune system is supposed to protect you, right? But an autoimmune disease causes your defenses to go into overdrive and attack your own healthy cells.
That is a really fascinating analogy. The autoimmune disease of the mind.
Yeah, because the ego evolved to protect our self-esteem, but when it goes into overdrive, it attacks our actual competence. It makes us blind to our own flaws.
So how does the book suggest we actually treat this disease if we're following the premise?
Well, it provides a pretty brilliant three-part framework, mapping the human journey. It argues that at any given moment, you are in one of three phases. You are either in aspire, success, or failure, and ego is the enemy in all three of those states.
Walk me through how it manifests in the first one, the aspiration phase.
So say you're starting a new company or trying to learn a complex skill. Ego tells you that you are already great, that you don't need to do the grunt work. It basically makes you talk about your goals rather than actually working toward them.
The classic trap of talking about the novel you're writing instead of actually writing it.
Exactly that. Then, in the success phase, think about, the last time you got a major promotion. Ego blinds you to your vulnerabilities. It breeds paranoia and makes you think you no longer need to listen to advice.
And the final phase?
Failure. In the failure phase, ego magnifies every setback into a massive existential crisis. It makes you bitter instead of resilient because your pride is wounded.
So it's essentially a comprehensive map of where we trip ourselves up.
It is, and the solution it offers is maintaining a rigorous standard of performance and practicing emotional detachment. By doing that, individuals can avoid the ruinous arrogance that destroyed brilliant but delusional figures like the automotive executive, John DeLorean.
Right.
Instead, the book suggests we emulate quiet, enduring, unglamorous success. People like the Civil War general William Tecumseh Sherman, who famously waived his rank and his ego to support Ulysses S. Grant. Or Katharine Graham, who navigated the Washington Post through immense adversity by focusing entirely on the work itself, not her own vanity.
Okay.
When you lay it out like that, it's just an incredibly effective masterclass in self-regulation.
Well, I will certainly concede that it sounds incredibly elegant in theory. It's a great pitch. But a rigorous intellectual dive into the text reveals that the underlying facts just aren't true, and the logic really falls apart.
You don't think the framework holds up?
I really don't. The framework takes highly complex cognitive, historical, and sociological realities and replaces them with simplistic moralizing. It utilizes a tactic academics call scientism, which is dressing up vague behavioral advice to make it sound like rigorous science.
Okay, scientism. That's a strong accusation.
It is, but it's accurate here. It relies heavily on cherry-picked anecdotes and, perhaps most troublingly, we need to look at its sociological function. When you tell people that the ultimate virtue is absolute passive acceptance of their circumstances.
Which is a core Stoicism principle.
Right. But when you tell them to internalize all external conflict as a failure of their own ego, you effectively tell marginalized populations to just be quiet and endure it. It is a philosophy that weaponizes passivity.
Wait, I think throwing the whole framework out over sociological concerns is missing the very real psychological utility it offers individuals. Let's look at the psychological mechanisms the book actually utilizes to fight the ego.
All right, let's unpack those mechanisms.
The foundation of defeating this toxic arrogance, according to the text, is the mastery of delayed gratification. It asks us to sacrifice the immediate validation, the quick hit of dopamine from our ego, for long-term mastery and purpose. And it anchors this very specifically in the famous Stanford Marshmallow test.
Ah, the marshmallow test. This is exactly where the foundation starts to crack.
But the test is a staple of behavioral psychology. I mean, for those who might need a refresher, researchers put a marshmallow in front of a young child and told them, you can eat this now, or if you wait 15 minutes until I come back, you can have 2 marshmallows.
Yes, a very famous setup.
And the original studies claim to show that the children who had the innate willpower to delay gratification, to suppress that immediate ego-driven desire, went on to achieve exponentially better life outcomes. Better test scores, better health, better careers. It's presented as a proven psychological mechanism for suppressing our destructive impulses.
And that is exactly why this book is methodologically bankrupt. The invocation of the marshmallow test is, honestly, intellectual snake oil.
How can you say that about one of the most famous studies in psychology?
Because, yes, it's a famous study, but large-scale conceptual replications of that exact experiment have spectacularly failed in recent years. Modern, rigorous statistical analysis has completely overturned the original conclusion.
Overturned it? How so? Are you saying the kids who waited didn't actually do better?
Oh, the kids who waited did do better in life, but not because of some innate moral willpower or ego suppression. The ability to delay gratification in that experiment was actually just a proxy for socioeconomic status and environmental stability.
Wait, environmental stability?
Let's think about how this actually works in the real world. Children from affluent, stable environments waited because they possessed an internalized heuristic, a mental shortcut that told them delayed rewards are actually delivered. Their environment taught them that if an adult promises something later, they get it.
Oh, so the kids from scarcity.
Exactly. Now picture a kid from a neighborhood where the fridge is sometimes empty, or from a household where an adult promises to bring a toy and never does. For that child, future promises are historically unreliable.
I see.
So, eating the marshmallow immediately isn't a lack of discipline or a failure of the ego. It is a highly intelligent, rational calculation based on their lived reality. A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Right. So by relying on this debunked interpretation of the science, the book falsely promises that if marginalized people simply adjust their mindset and magically summon the willpower to delay gratification, systemic rewards will suddenly materialize. It ignores the environment entirely.
Well, that is a very fair point regarding their replication crisis and the environmental confounds in that specific study. However, I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater just because the marshmallow test had issues.
What else is there to support it, scientifically?
Let's look at the broader cognitive science, specifically the work of Daniel Kahneman and modern dual process theory.
Okay, go on.
Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for showing us that the brain essentially operates on two systems. System 1 is fast, emotional, automatic, and highly prone to biases like confirmation bias or causal illusions.
And system 2 is the slow, deliberate, rational part.
Exactly. Our System 1 operates beneath our conscious awareness and constantly leads us into irrational, arrogant, snap decisions. Doesn't that function exactly like the ego Holiday describes? It is a biological mechanism we have to actively fight with the conscious, rational effort of System 2.
I actually come at Kahneman's man work from a completely different angle. Because cognitive science views the self, and by extension the ego, very differently than this book does.
How so?
The book treats the ego as a binary, independent enemy, like a little demon sitting on your shoulder that you can consciously defeat through sheer moral willpower. But neurobiology shows us that the self is an emergent, fluid property of complex neural networks. It is an evolutionary illusion.
An illusion? But people experience their ego every single day. I mean, we feel our pride getting wounded.
They experience the feeling of it, yes. But scholars of mindfulness like Yuval Noah Harari point out that thoughts think themselves. They arise without a central controller. Your brain generates thoughts as a survival mechanism.
But we can still choose how to react to them.
Sure, but by treating the ego as an externalized enemy rather than an intrinsic, automated function of our neurobiology, the book substitutes rigorous cognitive behavioral frameworks with simplistic moralizing. It tells the reader that every cognitive error, every fast System 1 mistake, is a moral failure of arrogance.
You think that's unfair?
It is scientifically illiterate. You can't declare war on a fundamental property of your own brain.
I hear what you're saying about the neurobiology, but I am not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning. Because you're demanding clinical, MRI-level precision from what is essentially a philosophical manual.
But if the science is wrong, the foundation is weak.
Even if the neurobiology is fluid, the behavioral output is very real. People do act out of arrogance. People do self-destruct because they refuse to listen to feedback. If we pivot from the clinical science to the historical methodology, this is where the framework really proves its empirical weight.
You genuinely think the history saves the premise?
Absolutely. The sheer volume of historical anecdotes in the book provides overwhelming proof that ego suppression works in the real world. Let's take the story of the Byzantine general Belisarius. Belisarius.
Oh, yes. Belisarius.
It is one of the most powerful examples in the text. Here is a man who saves the entire empire through his military genius. And how is he rewarded? He is betrayed by a jealous emperor Justinian.
According to the book's account.
Right. According to the account, he is blinded, stripped of his wealth, and reduced to begging in the streets of Rome. Yet he endures this horrific, unimaginable injustice with a smile. He completely lacks bitterness or ego. He accepts his fate without trying to tear down the empire in revenge. It is a stunning historical proof of the power of ultimate humility.
It would be incredibly stunning, if it were actually true. But the Belisarius story, exactly as you just told it and exactly as it is presented in the book, is an apocryphal myth.
Wait, the blinding is a myth?
It is literal historical fiction. It was invented centuries later to serve as a medieval morality tale. In historical reality, Justinian and Belisarius had their frictions, but they remained largely aligned.
So he wasn't begging in the streets?
Never. Belisarius was never blinded. He never begged. He retired in incredible comfort, maintaining his vast wealth and estates.
Well, okay, but how does that dismantle the whole book? It's one anecdote.
Because when the foundational evidence of a text is revealed to be mythological, the behavioral imperatives derived from it collapse. It exposes the author's catastrophic confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias in what way?
The author starts with a predetermined conclusion that passive endurance and ultimate humility are the keys to greatness, and then scours history and apparently historical fiction to forcefully contort anecdotes to fit that premise.
But let me challenge you on that. Does the factual truth of that specific history matter as much as the psychological utility of the parable?
I think it matters if you're presenting it as historical proof.
But can't an apocryphal story still function as an incredibly effective philosophical thought experiment? Think about it. We use fables all the time to model ideal behavior. The tortoise and the hare isn't historically accurate, but it teaches pacing.
That is true. Fables have their place.
Right. So if the image of a blinded Belisarius, helps a modern executive or a young athlete navigate a profound betrayal without destroying their own life in a quest for vengeance, hasn't the framework succeeded?
That is a compelling defense of using fables, I'll give you that. But it ignores the danger of how those fables are selected. Have you ever considered the silent evidence?
What do you mean by silent evidence? I know Nassim Taleb talks about that.
Yes, exactly. Even if we excuse the fabricated history, the book's methodology is poisoned by catastrophic survivor bias. The author cherry-picks a few successful, humble people like George Marshall or Eleanor Roosevelt and points to them as proof that humility creates success.
Because they are strong examples.
But walk with me through the invisible graveyard of history. Think about the millions of individuals who dutifully suppressed their egos, who remained relentlessly humble, kept their heads down, did the work, and were subsequently exploited, downsized, marginalized, and crushed by more aggressive peers. Their names aren't in the history books. That is the silent evidence.
Okay, I see where you're going with that. You're saying humility often leads to obscurity.
And conversely, it ignores the countless visionary egomaniacs who achieved massive paradigm-shifting success without ever suffering a retributive downfall. Look at the tech industry or Wall Street or politics. History is absolutely full of raging egomaniacs who conquered the world and died comfortably in their beds.
That is unfortunately very true.
So to point out a few humble winners and deduce a universal law of causality, while aggressively ignoring the millions of humble losers and arrogant winners, is statistical malpractice.
You make a strong point about survivor bias, but there are very real, factual examples in the book of individuals navigating horrific systemic adversity through exactly this kind of ego suppression, and they aren't just corporate examples. Look at Jackie Robinson.
The baseball legend?
Exactly. Jackie Robinson was chosen to integrate Major League Baseball precisely because he had the strength not to fight back. He silently endured horrific, unimaginably cruel racial abuse from fans, opposing players, and even his own teammates.
He did.
And the book rightly elevates his emotional detachment, his refusal to let his ego react to that abuse, as the ultimate virtue. He focused entirely on the standard of performance. He let his batting average do the talking.
Right.
To me, that demonstrates how this philosophy actually operates in the real world when the stakes are highest, and it proved undeniably effective.
This brings us to what I consider the most toxic element of the book's application: systemic pacification. What worked for Jackie Robinson in that specific, highly engineered context cannot be prescribed as a universal moral imperative. The philosophy heavily suffers from weird sample bias.
Weird, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic.
Exactly.
But how is Jackie Robinson's endurance an example of weird bias?
It's not Robinson himself, it's the author's framing of him. From the vantage point of affluent authors with economic and social capital, it is incredibly convenient to preach a doctrine of passive acceptance.
You think it's convenient for the powerful?
Yes. By elevating Jackie Robinson's silent endurance as the absolute pinnacle of virtue, this brand of pop stoicism effectively tells victims of systemic injustice to suck it up. Contrast Jackie Robinson with Rosa Parks.
Oh, okay. Let's contrast them.
Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat on that bus was not an act of silent endurance. It was a necessary, loud, systemic disruption. But by the rigid metrics of ego is the enemy, causing that kind of public disruption, centering your own rights, and refusing to accept that things outside your immediate control could actually be pathologized as an ego failing.
I see the conflict there.
The framework weaponizes the concept of humility to ensure that marginalized populations focus entirely on policing their internal emotional states rather than organizing to dismantle the architectures of their oppression.
I think that is a severe mischaracterization of the Stoicism discipline that Holiday is drawing from, though. The classical Stoics genuinely believed in the dichotomy of control.
Remind me of that principle.
It is the fundamental understanding that we only control our own judgments and our own actions, not external events. Accepting what you cannot change is not a corporate conspiracy to keep people down. It is a foundational, psychological coping mechanism for human survival.
In antiquity, maybe.
Look at Epictetus. He was literally a slave. He wasn't trying to preserve systemic inequality. He was providing a mental framework for maintaining human dignity in the face of absolute, crushing powerlessness.
And I agree completely about Epictetus. But this book isn't classical Stoicism. This is pop Stoicism. It's heavily filtered through Ryan Holiday's background in Machiavellian, public relations, and the manufacturing of media narratives.
You think the modern interpretation loses the core of it?
It entirely excises the most challenging parts. Classical Stoics, like Cato, demanded rigorous material asceticism. They viewed the accumulation of luxury, power, and wealth as inherently corrupting to the soul.
True, Cato was very austere.
Right. Modern pop Stoicism repackages the philosophy as a cynical behavioral life hack for Silicon Valley elites. It teaches venture capitalists and executives how to remain emotionally calm while aggressively acquiring massive capital, without ever demanding that they question if the acquisition of that capital or the system that allows it is actually virtuous.
So it's an enabler.
It acts as an intellectual shield for the hegemony. It lets the people at the top feel philosophically enlightened while changing absolutely nothing about how they operate.
I have to admit, when you lay out the empirical data surrounding the marshmallow test's replication failures, and when we visualize that graveyard of silent evidence, the sheer mathematical reality of survivorship bias, the defense of the book as a flawless, rigorous scientific text does falter.
It does. The data just isn't there.
And your point about the privilege blind spot, about who really benefits when we preach passive endurance, is incredibly powerful. However, I maintain that the desire to foster humility and to silence the arrogant voices in our heads is deeply appealing and fundamentally necessary.
For the individual, maybe.
Exactly. When an individual is standing in the wreckage of a failed project, or struggling to navigate a sudden massive success without losing their grounding, the practical utility of recognizing their own arrogance is undeniable. The framework might not solve macroeconomic inequality, but it might just save a person's career or, their marriage.
And I hear that, I really do. For the individual navigating a personal crisis, taking a breath and checking your pride is good advice. But the ultimate irony of ego as the enemy, as a comprehensive worldview, is that its very premise is a manifestation of the delusion it claims to cure.
What do you mean by that?
Think about it. Believing that one can command and overcome complex macroeconomic realities, systemic inequalities, and the chaotic variables of history, simply by policing one's internal emotional state is not humility.
It's not.
No! It is, in fact, the ultimate, most delusional ego trip of all. It is the profound belief that the universe bends to your internal mindset.
Wow. That is a profound place to leave it. As you, our listeners, navigate your own aspirations, successes, and failures, we advise you to use this kind of analytical breakdown to build your own mental immunity.
Keep questioning the narratives you're given.
Absolutely. Be wary of comforting, simplistic narratives that try to smooth over the chaotic, complex realities of life. Curing blind spots and shattering cognitive bias requires looking at the raw data, recognizing the missing evidence, and questioning the systemic structures around us. Thank you for joining the discussion and for tuning in to Cognitive Dose. Keep questioning, and we will see you next time.